They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Program to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed. Disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Tonight's guest has moved me beyond reason, and I am grateful for the movement. Ineffable moments guide my understanding, my being, and my path more than anything else, and such moments were handed to me by our guest tonight via his book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. From the heart of the man who grew up driven and focused, found the tributaries and pathways that would loosen and open him up, and fell into the meaning of life and love through pure emotion, we are given a gift of deep understanding and cosmic vision. Please welcome to Rogue Ways the doctor, the anthroposophist, I cannot say that word very well, the speaker, the writer, the teacher, but most importantly, the farmer, the father, the grandfather, and husband, Dr. Thomas Cowan. Dr. Cowan, it's a great honor to speak with you today.
Thank you. Just to clarify, I would not call myself an anthroposophist. So.
Oh, great. Yeah, that makes sense, because it was an early sort of movement that you fell into and led you some places, but you left it behind when you found it wanting.
That's more correct.
Awesome. Thank you for the clarification. And I always like to remind everyone listening that if they would like to support Rogue Ways, which I greatly appreciate those people out there who are doing so, please head to subscribestar.com/rogue-ways. And I always start, Dr. Cowan, with a pointless question of the episode. And so I was going to ask you, it's not that pointless after all, but what is your favorite food to grow, since you are a grower of food?
Lemon verbena.
Ooh, why lemon verbena?
Not really a food, but it's an herb, and I really like the smell, and it's very easy to grow because you can hardly kill it. And ooh. I basically cut the leaves and put it in a big jar of honey and soak it for about a month. And you get this intensely lemon flavored honey.
Yum.
And it's really awesome.
That sounds amazing. Is verbena does it have like big white flower balls? Or is that a totally different plant I'm thinking of? Okay.
No, it's sort of like a bushy sort of thing, but it's very hardy. It's very easy to grow.
That sounds awesome. I wonder if it grows here. Maybe I should add that to I have a rule that anything I plant has to have some sort of medicinal or food value to it. I can't just plant beautiful things. Although a lot of those things are beautiful too, so it works. But in your book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, you start with this dedication that is really beautiful, and you say that you are dedicating this to your grandchildren in hopes that someday they will live in a world fueled by joy, honesty, and freedom. And I loved that. Just to start off with, I was like, that is my hope for all of us, right? And I wonder where you think we are in regards to that vision and that hope.
We are about as far away from that as you can possibly get.
Agreed. It's not looking so good. Yeah. And where do you see any hope for heading out of it anytime soon towards freedom and beauty and honesty?
Not really. I can say that I didn't intend on this, but my dear friend and I, Sally Fallon,
yes,
just finished our third book together, my sixth book, that is now actually available for pre-sale on Amazon, and it's called The Contagion Myth.
Ooh.
And it's about our understanding of how we got the science dramatically incorrect in this current situation.
That sounds excellent. And Sally Fallon, for people who might not be familiar, is sort of I don't know, how would you describe her? She's like the curator of the Weston A. Price legacy, right?
Yeah, she's the founder of the Weston A. Price Foundation, as am I.
Along with you,
and
yeah.
She's the president, and I'm the vice president. And I would contend that of all the people I know, particularly around food, Sally has done more to change the culture than anybody I know. The reason that people eat good fats today is Sally. The reason people have access to raw milk is Sally. The reason people drink bone broth is because of Sally. The reason people know about kombucha is because of Sally. And sauerkraut, coconut oil, and a lot of other things. The reason there's hundreds of farms that are still viable is because of Sally, and her contribution to the culture is largely unrecognized, but is profound.
I agree with you, and I mean, I'm not capable of commenting on how unrecognized or recognized it is, because in my sort of little sphere, I think Sally is like a god amongst people, you know? I think a lot of people do recognize her, but I'm sure on the sort of larger stage of things, it's probably feels like no one notices. What a great contribution.
People have noticed, but so we'll see what happens with that. And apart from that, it's hard to say where this is going, but I don't think it's going very well.
No, but I mean, I'm grateful that people like you and people like Sally are still there, because like you said, we wouldn't even have those basics to be able to keep ourselves healthy. And, you know, I myself am now doing an autoimmune protocol sort of diet, and it's almost completely, I think, what Sally Fallon and Weston A. Price would have suggested for people in general, which, you know, I had to come through hardship, but I wouldn't be able to pull that off and eat so healthy now that I know what I should do for myself without people like that. So there's these little threads, you know, that we sort of weave and leave behind us as we go, and at least it keeps like a little light shining of hope, and maybe that's the best we can do for now.
Yeah, although I must say I'm not a big fan of hope.
Yeah.
Hope has an interesting history. If you actually read the story of the origin of hope, it comes from the story of Pandora's box.
Really?
And the story goes, there was basically a princess who was part of the kingdom, and I don't know the exact details, but somehow she was told that all the evils of the world are in this box, and she was never to open the box. And so the world was going well, and then I think the king went away and they left her alone, and she was curious, and somehow she opened the box and all the evils like greed and lying and hatred and all that were unleashed on the world. But the only one, she managed to close the box, and the only one left in the box was hope. Now, there's two ways of interpreting that story. One is that the gods put hope in the box with all the evils to give us a kind of boon, so we wouldn't lose hope. And that's the usual interpretation of the story. However, there is another interpretation, which is hope is the worst evil of all. And the reason is because, you know, if you find yourself like, I'm being poisoned by glyphosate, so I hope somebody does something about it. Right? And what'll happen is nobody will do anything about it.
Yes.
So I'm in a bad marriage. I hope something happens here to make it better. And next thing you know, 10 years later, you're still in a bad marriage.
I see.
And hope is what people, very clever people, use to paralyze people.
That is a good point.
And that's why when people say, I'm going to hope for the best, I always think there is no chance.
Yes, I can see that point. I have, you know, this idea where like people say, whether you're religious or not, but just the concept of like God does for those who do. Like, don't just ask for, you know, favors and then sit back and wait for them to happen. I feel like that has to be the same way that we look at hope. Like, you can't just have hope and then just like, okay, so I'm just hoping and that's all. Like, you have to be like, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this because I'm going to try to make this thing happen, right? Like, I'm going to try to make healthy fats and, you know, a good eating a part of people's lives, and I hope that it takes, but I'm going to like work really hard to make that happen as well. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know if
hope
that still counts as hope.
Hope is the road to inactivity.
Yeah, that would be the the
And
definitely
that's
wrong
why
path.
the worst charlatans in history have offered people hope.
Agreed. And it is definitely, it's like that bread and circuses. It's like another little thing to throw at the masses to keep people somewhat not comfortable,
Yeah.
but able to stick with their
And hope for the
enslavement.
best.
Yeah, I see it. I see the danger. But I hope, I hope that people can have hope in the moments where that would like keep them from giving up. That's the type of hope that I like, you know, where you might look at the world and say, wow, what is even the point? This is all so horrible. It's hopeless. I'm not even going to try. So then it can be paralyzing to not have it.
Because a lot of people have said to me over the years, things are so bad health-wise, I'm going to give up. I have no more hope. And, you know, when I was younger, that used to throw me off. But after a while, I became impervious to those sort of things. And I would say, okay, you gave up hope. What are you going to have for breakfast tomorrow?
Yeah.
They'd say, I don't know, probably eggs. And then what are you going to do? I don't know. I don't have any hope. I say, so you're going to just sit there? I mean, it's actually an interesting place to be because there is no possibility of doing nothing.
Yeah, that's true.
That's an illusion. You could sit there and just stew on your troubles, but that is actually a active choice of what you're going to do.
You're still doing that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and so we fool ourselves into this concept of I've now, quote, given up. Well, I mean, what does that even mean? You can't give up.
That's a good point.
It's a delusion, and it makes you sick, by the way, because you think you've given up when actually your liver is still working just like always, and your heart is still working just like always, and you haven't given up. You just have, in your mind, convinced yourself that you've given up when no such thing has actually happened. And that's the trouble.
It's true.
I don't mind when people give up.
You're like, good, this is a good place to start.
Yeah, you're good. See what you do next. Because I can tell you, if you're willing to give up, so-called give up, you weren't in a good place in the beginning. And so you might end up in a better place.
I was just thinking that as you were describing this, I was like, some of the moments where I felt like I was giving up, I actually was letting go of a bunch of stuff I did not need anymore. And it actually turned out to be really good changes for me.
Yeah. I mean, you think about this with like marriages, people eventually give up, and it's usually the best thing that ever happened to them.
True. If you can give up, it wasn't good to start with.
Yeah, right. If you're willing to give up, it wasn't worth doing in the first place. So I don't mind people giving up. They can give up all they want. In fact, I'd rather they give up than force people to do stuff that isn't good for them.
Yeah. Well,
I wish a lot more people would give up.
For real.
Just give up. Go sit home and don't bother other people.
Go sit on the ground with your shoes off and think about things for a while.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Just don't bother the rest of us.
Speaking of giving up, and this is sort of jumping, you know, but we don't have to go in any sort of linear order, so let's go for it. But I love this moment that you describe in your book where you have left your previous marriage and you sort of have, I think you've given up on anthroposophy. Why can't I say this word? Anthroposophy. However you say that. And you...
Anthroposophical medicine.
Thank you. And you have gone to this conference and that didn't go very well either. And you're like in a donut shop, which doesn't even really make sense for you as a person because you're a very, you know, healthy and aware person. And donuts are sort of the opposite of that. And yet in that moment you meet this person and the way you describe it is so beautiful. And you're like, you just looked at this person and you thought, I have to know this person for the rest of my life. And you know, and this changed everything for you. And so I want you to talk about that moment, if you will, and that experience. But I also wanted to ask you about that. Do you think that you would not have been able to have that experience if you hadn't been in a place where you had given up sort of almost like everything that came before and been at that almost like this breaking point? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know that I was quite in a breaking point, but yeah, I was in a situation where I just didn't see the way forward. And that's a good place because it's not necessarily fun, but you realize that, everything you were doing and thinking probably wasn't working very well.
Yeah.
And once you come to that realization, to me, it was almost a sort of angelic gift. And luckily, Linda felt the same thing.
Yeah.
And, so there you go. It changed both of our lives dramatically. And I don't think whatever I've been able to do that's positive since then, I don't think would have happened without that meeting. So that really was that and meeting Sally, which was also a weird situation. Those were two of the biggest turning points in my life.
And meeting Sally was also sort of a, however you want to call this, like a synchronistic or a,
Well, she had just published Nourishing Traditions, and she did an interview in a magazine. It was called Spectrum. And for some reason, somebody sent me a copy of this interview that she did. And I read it, and being me, I read it and thought something like, shit, this woman knows more about food than I do,
yeah.
which really annoyed me, because I didn't think that was really possible. But it was very clear that she did. And then literally the next day, she calls me up out of nowhere. I don't know why how that happened, and said, can we talk? And I basically left my patients, and we had about an hour talk. And it was very clear at that point that she did know more about food than I do, which again was annoying to me, but I had the sense to leave it alone and just fine. That's just the way it is. And then she came to do her first public talk on food around my practice about a month later. That was the first public event she did around food, and now she's probably done thousands.
Yeah.
And we went for a walk a few days later, or a day later or something, and we decided to write the first book, Fourfold Path to Healing. And so that really started my career. I mean, before that, I would say, not clear on where I was going. I mean, I was doing a lot of groundwork, but I was stuck in a mode that wasn't getting me anywhere. And that really changed a lot of things.
And how random that you read that the day before and then she called you. And did she?
Yeah, that was very weird.
How did she select you?
I don't know. I don't remember that part.
That's so awesome. This is how these things are sort of meant to be, at least for me.
Yeah, I've had a lot of those kind of bizarre encounters, meeting Steiner in a hut in Swaziland and Weston Price in Swaziland. And, so there's a lot of those in my life. It's been a kind of guided tour, as they say.
Yeah.
So is everybody's, but they just maybe don't realize it as much as I have had the privilege of seeing it.
Absolutely. Well said. I agree 100%. I love that you described that too, that moment of meeting Linda as this moment of sort of coming home, and you say alone no more. And I resonate deeply. And I guess I want to emphasize this to people because I think in our culture and our society, we really highly emphasize sex and we really de-emphasize love and connection. And I don't know if everyone realizes that you can find this level of connection with another human where you feel like genuinely 100% of you is fully, honored or whatever, and that it really does feel like you've come home. And I wish we emphasized it more because I wish people knew, because I think people literally think it's not really even possible. The people who think they have that, like, they're just kind of woo-woo weirdos and, they're pretending or whatever. And you just got to settle for the best thing you think you can find that checks all the boxes on the list. And I just wish people knew.
Well, it's just one aspect of people have been, I would almost use the word bewitched into thinking a very irrational and unscientific thing that anything that's not physical matter doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Of course, nobody actually believes that, and it's
Right.
actually been disproven. So you can't possibly be any kind of scientific person and believe that. But the problem is we have been, it's really like a spell has been cast over humanity, so that people believe it even though they don't actually believe it. And, one of the ways I get into this is, I've had many conversations with, because I wrote a book on the heart, and cardiologists and heart surgeons and things. And one of the things that you have to believe as a medical doctor is that only material substance exists and there is nothing else to a human being.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. So I get into a conversation and the cardiologist or the heart surgeon says that. And then at some point they say, you only things that can be seen and measured exist, or measured and quantified. So fair enough. I say, do you love your wife? Of course. How much? 10, 20,
yeah.
186, 4,312? Well, that's a ridiculous question. Why? You said if it doesn't exist, if you can't measure it, you can't quantify it, it doesn't exist, therefore you must not. And then they say, well, I love somebody with all my heart. And so if you dissect somebody's heart, are you going to find something called love in there?
It's tucked away in there.
Little thing like a pea?
Yeah.
As far as I know, nobody has found that. It's a superstition.
Yeah.
And basically, if you look at modern physics, they say that this stuff that we're made out of is basically, a nucleus, and then somewhere in the next city is the electron.
Yeah.
And 99.9% of it is basically nothing, or space, or the ether, or something that doesn't have any physical presence. And so if you put those quote things that are made of nothing all together, then you have your foot.
Yeah.
Or a chair. And so how does that work? And to make it even more complicated, they say that they being the physicists say that some of the time the substance is a particle, which is made of nothing, and the other time it's a wave which isn't made of anything. It's just a wave. There's no physical substance at all. And amazingly, the determining factor of whether it's a particle or a wave is whether you look at it.
Yeah, whether or not you're paying attention.
So that's just the facts. Now, how a wave makes, that chain you're wearing around your neck, I don't know.
Right.
And maybe they know, but nobody I ever heard actually has. How does it even make a virus or a heart or anything? And what it means is that our version of reality is make-believe. It's simply a superstition. And it's an easily proven superstition, but unfortunately, and it has a certain utility on certain macro levels, but it's not actually an accurate depiction of the world. And so that has many ramifications because, like you're talking about my heart book, I talk about how the shape and pattern of organs determines the way that it shapes energy and actually functions.
Yeah.
But of course, if you don't believe in shapes or patterns or energies, because you're superstitious basically, and so you don't believe in reality, you believe in superstitions,
right?
Then you don't understand that, and then you think that the heart somehow pushes the blood.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous because anybody can see that it doesn't do that. But if you're not connected with reality, then you do think that, and that becomes a sort of a central driver of illness, because essentially you have a mental illness.
Really good point. You're so detached from things. It's like you're creating a detachment from reality. And how can you be detached from reality? Reality is all we exist in, and we swim in it. But I would
I don't even know if I'd call it a detachment, because a detachment can be good.
Yeah.
You're not detached. You have an active belief in a reality which doesn't exist.
You're like over attached.
That's not a detachment. you're deluded. Not you, but
yeah.
the whole Western scientific edifice is basically a delusion. It's interesting where that came from. And, one of the places it came from was, especially in biology and medicine, and I didn't make this up, a guy named Goethe, who was sort of the forerunner of Steiner, he pointed out that the central mistake in Western science was, so they wanted to study nature. So let's take a frog. And the point was to help frogs live better lives, to understand what makes up a frog, to understand the parts of a frog, to understand the frog's role in the world. And so you could help frogs do better, right? That's the whole scheme of nature or of science. So what's the first thing they do to the frog?
Take it out of nature.
They kill it.
Yeah.
Right? So they kill the frog, and then they dissect it, cut it up into little pieces so that they can understand what makes a frog work.
We're helping the frog.
Right. I can tell you for sure that it didn't help that frog.
No.
Because that frog's dead.
Absolutely.
And then they did it to about 100,000 other frogs, and so they're all dead. And I would contend that while you can learn some things from a dead frog, anything that has to do with the life of a frog, you cannot learn once the frog is dead.
It seems so simple and obvious, but it's clearly not, apparently, according to these people's behavior. Well, we mentioned the shape and the structure of the heart and the amazing things it does, and I really want to get into that so people have an understanding of it, because it's fascinating to me, and I never knew that the heart does not pump blood, for example, and you explain it and you break it down very well in your book, even to a point where I can understand it, and it has a lot to do with this fourth phase of water and the idea of structured water, and I wonder if you want to sort of describe that for people.
So, the basic idea is, when I say the heart doesn't pump the blood, and, we have articles on this on our website that's called drtomcowan.com. So there's an article called "The Heart is Not a Pump," and then there's another article by an anesthesiologist who describes how it's impossible for the heart to pump the blood.
And once you broke it down, it was so clear. I was like, yeah, that wouldn't even work.
Yeah,
but
so the basic idea in conventional science is the heart is a pressure propulsion device, which means the walls of the heart generate pressure by squeezing the blood that's in it, and somehow that pushes the blood. Now, the first thing you notice about that is the blood is about a 1.1 pound organ that has a very irregular shape and not at all like a sort of normal pump. Some places it's 1 muscle layer thick, some it's 7, and it doesn't look like anything that would pump anything. And the second thing is, if you put the blood vessels end to end, they would encircle the earth, say 3 times. Wow. So that's a lot of blood vessels.
Yeah.
And in those blood vessels, you have this very viscous fluid called blood, and it has cells in it called red blood cells and platelets. They're not actually cells, but let's just say they're cells. And they're about the same size diameter as the internal diameter of the smallest blood vessels. So in other words, you're trying to push this sticky fluid with stuff in it, and the stuff is about the same size as the vessel walls, 3 times around the earth with a 1 pound bit of muscle. Yeah. And that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Not only that, but halfway in this trip around the world, it actually stops, and that's the capillaries, and then it gets restarted again. And it's a bit like if you were getting on a bus from San Francisco to New York City, and the bus stopped in St. Louis, and the bus didn't have an engine because the engine is in San Francisco. Then I can tell you I wouldn't get on the bus unless I didn't want to go to New York.
Right.
Because there's nothing to make the blood moving again once it stops. In fact, anybody with any sense would put the pump where it stops rather than where it's going the fastest, which is at the heart.
Yeah.
The other thing is if you do a velocity flow diagram, the velocity of the speed of the movement of the blood is the same going into the heart as it is going out of the heart, which then begs the question of what actually did this pump do?
Yeah.
And that's a crazy, there's no answer to that. Now, the other thing that's interesting is if you look at the outflow tube of the heart, which is called the aortic arch, it's shaped like an arch, like McDonald's. And it's analogous to if you have a garden hose and you put it on a spigot outside your house and you shape it like an arch and then you turn it off, so that's diastole, and then you turn it on full blast and the hose can bend because it's flexible, I think everybody would agree that the hose would straighten out.
Yeah.
Right? That's just because you put more pressure and it would straighten out. But interestingly, the aortic arch, which is the outflow tube of the heart, when it's in systole, which is when the blood is moving the fastest, that's the pumping time, the arch bends in, not out. And that makes no sense.
Huh.
And I remember when I was in medical school and I was working in cath labs and I would see that the heart would so-called pump and then the arch would bend in. I would say, how can that happen? Because that doesn't, if you're going to push that hard, you would straighten the tube out, and they didn't know. So,
I can just imagine you asking these questions and then being like, why are you, who cares? Like, we already know everything we need to know. Let's move on, right?
Yeah, they don't know, and they don't care, and it's not of interest, and so that's the end of it.
Wow.
But when you understand how the blood moves, it all makes perfect sense. So blood is stopped, and as you said, all water exists in 4 phases, one of which is structured. And what happens is, so it's like a gel phase. It's like Jell-O.
Yeah.
And all gels are negatively charged. So if you can imagine a tube and it has a hydrophilic surface, meaning a water-connecting, water-loving surface like a protein, it will form this negatively charged gel right next to the hydrophilic surface. And then because it separates the charges, you get positive protons dissolved in the liquid water in the middle. And they repel each other and they start the water moving. And you can see this in a beaker. You can suspend a tube, a hydrophilic tube, horizontally, and then you shine a light on it because that activates the formation of the gel. And it forms this negatively charged gel next to the tube. And then it puts the positive protons in the middle and it starts the water flowing through the tube with no outside heat source or energy source, except if you put it in a lead box, it stops flowing. And then if you shine the sun on it, it starts flowing. If you put your hand on it, it starts flowing. If you put your dog next to it, at least most dogs, then it starts flowing. And here's where it gets very interesting.
Wow.
If you put your cell phone next to it, it stops flowing.
Whoa.
Because cell phones, the electromagnetic fields degrade the ability of this water to form in this gel phase. And so there's no charge, and the charge is the pump. Now, once it starts flowing, because it flows, the tubes start narrowing up the veins, it will go faster and faster as it goes back to the heart, just because like a river, if you go from a wetland down into a central river, it will go faster just because narrowing the channels.
Yes.
So it goes faster and faster, it gets to the heart, and then the heart essentially stops the blood and it converts it into a vortex. And that creates a suction, which sucks the aortic arch in, and the suction distributes the blood to the places it needs to go in the body. And that's a very precise and accurate picture of how the blood moves and the role the heart is in there. And unfortunately, that there's very few people who either understand that or believe it. And therefore, we can't really treat heart disease properly because we don't know what a heart is doing.
I can't believe that you can break this down. It's so very clear. Even I can understand it, and yet yet it's somehow not accepted. Or why wouldn't you believe this? Like, what's stopping them from understanding this?
I mean, I don't know. All I can say is there's two people who are talking about this. I don't talk about it so much anymore, but
Yeah.
there's me and there's a guy named Bronco First, who's an anesthesiologist. And he wrote a book about this and really broke it down into detail. He writes for cardiologists and engineers. And interestingly, the foreword to the book was written by the head of cardiac anesthesiology at Harvard Medical School. So that presumably is the person in the world who knows the most about how a heart functions. And he said, Bronco is correct. The heart can't possibly be a pump. And that's why we can't treat heart failure better now than 50 years ago. So I like to bring that up because, as I say, I may be wrong, but I'm apparently not the only one.
I don't think you're wrong. Obviously, I'm not.
I am either.
I'm not the expert on it.
The reason why, the reason why that it's not accepted is, I mean, I don't know exactly, but my guess is because we're under a spell.
Yeah.
And because we're under a spell, people who are under, we've had essentially a spell cast upon us so that we only see things in a certain way. And if anybody points out, the emperor has no clothes and your life is dependent on life and livelihood on pretending that the emperor does, and you may be ostracized and your wife will leave you and your Mercedes will be taken away and you can't possibly live anymore. You just don't see it.
Yeah.
Like Will Rogers said, never try to convince anybody of anything who makes their living believing the opposite.
It's true. And the response is often violent and severe in those situations.
So that's why. I don't know why, but that's my guess.
I think you just hit the nail on the head for the most part. And I want to get to a bunch of things about this heart that you're describing. And one of the things that I thought of when you're describing this, positive and negative charge, the structured water with the other water shooting through it, is why haven't we utilized this? Is this not perpetual energy? And could we not solve energy needs using this just water and sun, water in people's hands? Or you know what I mean?
Yeah, there have been devices. There was a guy named Victor Schauberger who created a bunch of devices. One looked like a kind of flying saucer, and he could run the entire flying saucer on water and the energy from the sun. But he basically said that there's two ways of generating energy in the world. There's explosion, and there are various forms of explosion. You can use nuclear explosion, you can use combustion engines. There's lots of different explosive forms. And all those degrade substance. And so we basically have a variety of explosive technologies.
Yeah.
And he said there is another way of generating energy called implosion, which is what nature does to create form and substance. So, a carrot is a implosion device that takes substance and imbues it with energy to create form. And that's a creation of energy. And he basically said that process creates energy and works through suction and implosion. Now, there is a device that I use to water my garden and take showers in, which they actually create a torus-shaped vortex in this shower head. And so you put the water through it. And the amazing thing is if you put your hand on the outlet where the water is coming out, it makes your hand stick to the shower head. Because the water, which is coming out like a shower, is actually being suctioned out, not pushed out. Like if you put your hand on a shower, it of course pushes it away.
Yeah.
And there is a little bit of that, but the main effect is it sucks your hand against the shower head. And, you know, I've had occasion to water like half a strawberry bed with this water versus normal water, and they grow twice as much. And the strawberries don't rot as nearly as quickly as the other ones. And it's like a waterfall. And frankly, that's what I shower in every day.
Wow.
And we even figured out tentatively how to sell them on our website, because it's it is the answer, you know, that's not the answer to the energy of the world, but implosion is. Now, if you could ask the question, why don't we do that? I mean, that's complicated because that's a political question.
Right.
I can tell you, my interest in this is not so much the political question, is more, is this a scientific question? Does this real?
Yeah.
Because whether somebody's going to do it or not is different. I'm not, you know, that's not my issue. My issue is, can you get it to work? And I already know that you can get it to work. That's what life is.
Right.
And I've seen devices that can do that. Now, obviously, they need to be improved and worked with and made more commercially viable. But the reality is they could be, but people have tried to have that not happen instead of trying to have it happen. And
Right.
I don't really want to speculate as to why that is, but I can imagine there's some reasons for it.
Yes, I think we can all imagine those reasons. And we've all heard of those stories, and it's sad, and I hope there's that word again, that we get past that. And so let's go back to the vortex aspect of the heart, because this is also fascinating, and there's pictures of it in the book. It would be hard to show it on the screen, but it seems pretty awesome. And what do you think about this vortex action? What is it actually doing, and what's the sort of mystery of it?
I mean, so the blood goes faster and faster. It comes into the heart. The heart stops the blood. The way it's shaped in a very particular way so as to create a vortex spiral movement of the blood inside, particularly the left ventricle. And so that's what it's doing. A vortex is the way that nature imbues substance with energy. In other words, it's the way that nature uses to create implosion or life. Life is just substance imbued with implosive energy. So, you know, the Sufis say that's that moment where the blood is stopped and the vortex is created is where God enters into the human being.
I love that.
And that is a way to describe it. If you think of God as this creative energy force that is what we call life, that's what happens in that vortex. And so then this life energy is sent out through the blood to the other organs to basically make us alive. And that's why it happens in the heart. And that's why we associate life and love and connection with our heart. And you can even measure the energetic field, which also looks like a torus. And that's why when you want to create a device, you're looking for a torus-shaped field.
The torus seems highly essential in all of this creation of form and energy into form. And it's awesome. And so, since we don't understand that, obviously, like you said, we can't treat heart disease. And I feel like there's two sort of aspects of that. And one is that if we're not understanding the actual mechanical, side of it, then we can't treat that side of it. But also, if we're not understanding the sort of emotional, spiritual side of it, then we're not understanding like the root of the causes of heart disease as well. Is that a fair way to describe it?
It's very practical, though, because if I'm correct, which I actually know that I am.
Yeah.
Then, for instance, if the ability to create this fourth phase water is weak, then you will end up with a poor flow, right? Because the flow, the action of movement of the blood is because of this electrostatic force created by the separation of charges in the water.
Yeah.
So if that's weak, then you have poor flow. If you have poor flow, then you have, starving tissues and organs, and you can't get rid of waste products. So if your flow is weak, your body does the only thing it can do, which is to squeeze down on the blood vessels, right?
Right.
And it's like if you have a weak flow through your garden hose, you could get a smaller diameter garden hose, and the flow will be more, or the velocity anyways will be more, and that's a temporary solution. But that's what we call high blood pressure. So in other words, if you think like I do, then you see that high blood pressure is not a disease. It's a compensatory strategy the body uses to increase flow. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's also, it hurts you in the long run because but what else is the body supposed to do? You don't have any flow, so it increases the pressure. It's true that destroys your organs, but what are you going to do? You don't have any flow.
Yeah.
And so you do it. Now, unfortunately, medicine doesn't understand that. So they think the high blood pressure is a disease to be treated, even though they say it's idiopathic, which means they don't understand why it happens.
Everything that happens to me is idiopathic. I'm like,
yeah,
okay,
everything is idiopathic.
What good are you?
If you don't know how to think properly,
yeah.
you don't see what the problem is. And so they treat it with drugs to widen the tubes, which of course works to lower the pressure, but it doesn't work to make your life better.
Yeah.
It just lowers the pressure, but you need pressure to perfuse your organs. And the proof of that is if you ask a doctor, how many people have you cured of high blood pressure with drugs? The answer is 0. In fact, they get angry if you even suggest that one could cure high blood pressure.
Ugh.
That's ridiculous. You can't cure high blood pressure. But I've seen that hundreds of times. All you do is increase the flow, and then the body stops its strategy of increasing pressure. And then as long as you keep increasing the flow, you're good. You don't have to use drugs or diuretics, all that. Diuretics, so that you have poor flow, you increase the pressure, so then you drain off some of the water. I mean, it's like the thinking behind this is like literally, I wouldn't even say grade school level, because that would be an insult to an actual third grader.
Yeah.
But it's ridiculous. No sensible person would think such a thing. But it's because it's institutionalized, you have to think that. And if you don't, you get fired.
Yeah. You get fired, you lose your patients, use your livelihood, or the insurances will stop covering you because you're not doing things. Done. It's absolutely insane.
Very sad, but that's how it is. I mean,
and so clearly you have described many ways in which people can support their heart health, and they make way more sense to me. I feel like even if you're not, even if you're a very materialist sort of person, they make more sense. They just are logical. And so if you want to describe some of those things for people out there who may be wondering, okay, what do I do then? How do I keep my heart healthy, or how do I make it healthy again if it's not doing so well right now?
Well, it depends on the situation. But, just for some very simple things, you go back to this model, you put a hydrophilic tube suspended horizontally in a beaker of water, and you shine the sunlight on it, and it will start flow.
Yeah.
Flow is basically the nourishment of life. And so if you put a cell phone next to it, it'll stop the flow. So if you're a person who always has a cell phone on your person, or wears a smartwatch or some device, you will eventually. So anybody who like is out in the sun and your bare feet are on the ground and you're actually have enough minerals and your water is pure. And I describe all these things in various books.
Yeah.
They're very simple, and eat good food, then you will restore your flow and you won't have to take, drugs that basically kill you to have your circulation work properly. I mean, it's not actually very complicated.
No.
It's what people have done throughout human history, but I mean, we forgot.
Yeah. And it's like, these are the things, it's funny because I feel like people would say like, oh, I don't have time, or like, just give me the pill or something. But it's like, you don't have time to touch other people in a loving way. You don't have time to go sit on the earth and put your feet on it. You don't have time to take in some, hopefully good unobstructed sunlight, and drink, fresh water, pure water, clean water, and have the right minerals. Like, if you don't have time for all that, what's the point of life, really? Or like, if you start doing those things, you'll notice all the ways that you start feeling better, and like, then life is really way more exciting and fun to live anyway. So it is really simple things. But it's also funny because I suggest to people who I work with all the time who are asking me, what should I do and about whatever. And I almost always, no matter what the problem is, I'm like, go sit outside and put your feet on the ground. Go sit outside in the sun and put your feet on the ground. You're instantly going to have this release and this sort of filling and this positive feeling or coming. You can think more clearly. And so I love that you emphasize that sort of reconnecting with people, reconnecting with nature, and as a doctor, as a person who came sort of, I think, from materialism and discovered this through a pretty materialistic foundation, to suggest those things, I think, is really powerful for people, because we do hold on to that sort of institutionalization and, the authority that you have gained through your expertise.
I don't mind anymore. If somebody wants to not do that and take drugs, it's fine, and they'll just be sick, and that's their choice.
True.
What I don't like is that they impose that whoever is not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
That's where it starts to get annoying, because I don't see why they can't, if they want to choose to do that, that's fine with me. I mean, I think it's a stupid choice, but whatever.
Right.
I don't get where the regulation against doing something different seems to make sense to people. That's where we're starting to get into more and more, and that's the real dangerous part.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, let me have my...
Yes, such a thing. Even if it's very clear scientifically, then you're an outcast and a danger to society, and that's a very slippery slope.
Yes. It's like that level of censorship that actually then prohibits action that doesn't harm anybody, and even by all objective standards helps the person who's doing it. I don't know. It's crazy. Shoot, I lost the thing that I was going to follow up that question with, so I guess I'll hope to come back to it. But in the meantime, I wonder in the last few minutes we have if we can talk about, you talk about this sort of confluence of like the structure of the human body and how it almost mirrors this musical structure. And I had never heard it presented, at least in that way, where you talk about our teeth and how they're somehow related to our musical structure, and I think some other aspects of our bones or our anatomy also. And so I wonder if you could talk about that for a moment, and if you could answer whether or not you think that implies that sound could be used for healing in some way or wellness. Or if those two things just have nothing to do with each other.
The basic question underlying this, I think your question is, does shape, form, and material affect invisible energies to create function? In other words, does shape, geometric shapes, and the material that geometric shapes are made of, is it possible that organizes or influences energetic flow to create effects?
Oh, we keep freezing.
Oh.
Shoot.
Very Stradivarius violin, right? You there?
Oh, you just came back and I heard violin, and I didn't hear you since you said, does shape organize or influence energetic flow? It cut out. And now
Right.
it's cutting out again.
So you take an example of that. Consider the Stradivarius violin.
Okay.
So it has to be a certain shape, right? Otherwise it doesn't work. Right. And it has to be made out of certain kind of wood. Otherwise it doesn't work. You cannot make a violin in any shape you want with like silly putty. Right. It doesn't work. So clearly, and sound is an invisible energy.
Yeah.
We can hear it, but we can't determine entirely the effect on a human being. I mean, that's obvious.
Yeah.
And that can't be the only example. In other words, the shape and the form and the material that things are made out of basically are nature's way of organizing energy flow to have an effect. So in your example of the teeth, children, until the so-called change of teeth, have 4 sets of 5 teeth. They have 20 teeth total, and which happens to be the scale that children's lullabies are almost always sung in. And there's a sort of resonance, these 4 sets of 5 teeth. Can you hear me okay?
It's coming in and out, but we're getting most of it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Sometimes that happens with this.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So that's the world of the child until about age 7 or 8 or so. And they live in a pentatonic world. That's the energy resonance that they're part of. And then over time, they change into 4 sets of 8 teeth, which is essentially the octave scale. Oh. And so we can see then the child moves from a pentatonic scale of lullabies to the octave scale of basically, which is the musical scale. Wow. And then you see a resonance with a different kind of energy, which is a different scale. And of course, that's not the only example of how the shape of our heart, the shape of our kidneys, essentially they're focused energy transducers to make an effect. The shape of the lens of your eye, the purpose is to be transparent to light. The shape of the bursa in your knee is to create a repulsion so your knee can glide properly. And basically what we're talking about is the tissues, the organs are organized water into various shapes and forms, and the water accepts the energy and therefore makes an effect. And so a lens is structured gel water, and the effect is to be transparent to the light. And you can see that, and then you can see disease is when you interfere, like you dissolve some poison in your lens, or you expose it to electromagnetic fields, and that distorts it, and then you have a cloudy lens, and we call that a cataract. And then you can't see because it's not transparent to the light. So you can really see, I mean, I was looking for a kind of unified field theory of disease, and you can see it, that the tissues and organs are organized water, each depending on the function that it's meant to do. And when it gets distorted, you have disease, and the body tries to detoxify that by getting rid of it. And essentially that describes pretty much all the diseases that we have.
Yeah. It's definitely seems like a unified theory, and it's very powerful to consider life that way and through that angle, and it's empowering because it allows us to then know what we need in order to stay and remain healthy and to heal ourselves. And I love that you bring up the cell phones and the EMF radiation, but the way that you describe it, actually, I mean, as much as I've heard about this and thought about this and, seen different sort of experiments that show this, the way that you talked about it, I think is the most impactful on me, because imagining, knowing that I am water, and that I have all this structured water within me, and that this thing is literally destroying that, as well as all the other EMF radiation around me, really makes me a lot more serious about finding ways to limit my exposure to those things. I don't know why that image of it is just more effective. And so
it's basically destructuring your tissues, and tissues are fundamentally just structured water. And if you destructure that, you're in trouble.
Yeah. So I hope.
And even interesting, your brain is the most has the most concentrate or most amount of water of any tissue in the body. It's about 80% by volume.
Wow.
Is water, and that's why it's essentially the seat of the mind, because the most energetic force that we encounter is probably thoughts.
Wow.
And the thoughts are basically accepted by the water in your brain, and that creates a change in the configuration of the water structure, which then we have an action, which is to think something or say something. The thoughts are not internally generated by the brain. That's like looking for the dissecting the radio. And that's what Western science does. They want to know where these thoughts come from, so they dissect your brain, and I can guarantee they will never find a thought in there.
No.
Because it's no more sensible than, where did that voice come from in the radio? It must look and see if there's a little person in the radio. And there isn't any little person. It's that the radio is an acceptor of sound waves, just like the water in your brain is an acceptor of thought waves. And then it changes, just like the radio. And I don't exactly know how radio does that, but somehow it organizes those sound waves into music or voice or something.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what a brain does. And we don't see that because we think there must be material. The brain must be secreting thoughts, even though that's complete nonsense, but that's what we believe. And you can't get anywhere like that, because you're basically investigating superstition.
Yeah. I love that you flip that around back on the sort of materialists, that they're actually the superstitious ones. It's perfect. And it's just like we were saying, you can't find the little guy inside the head, that's making thoughts, or you can't find the thoughts in there. And just like you can't find like love in the heart, right? And we all know these things exist, but
you can't find it.
And I know we're running short, and you have to go. And so I want to give you time really quickly, if you could. I really love how you emphasize that we're taught to sort of lose trust in ourselves through this materialist paradigm, and we're, if you're told that love is in your heart, but you can't find it there, but you have love. And so you're just sort of programmed to not trust yourself and your experiences. And I don't know if you want to comment on that before you go, but I also want to give you a chance to tell people where they can find all of your amazing work and your books. Tell them your website again, and anything else that you have maybe coming up that you want people to know about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a central paradox that we have been taught that we can't trust ourselves, and we get taught that in various ways, mostly through how we're raised. And it means that people will believe experts even though they have no clue what these experts are actually talking about. Yeah. And that's really awful. I mean, it even comes up now. If you ask people how they, what causes COVID-19, they say a virus. And they say, how do you know it's caused by a virus? And they have no clue.
They have no idea.
No clue. They don't even know how you would go about knowing that. In which case, you're completely at the mercy of somebody telling you what to believe. Because you can't possibly know that for yourself. And that is a very dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
As far as people can go to drtomcowan.com, and pretty much all that, sign up for our newsletters and all that. That's always a good thing. We have a YouTube channel, but I have no idea what that is. But pretty much you can find everything on drtomcowan.com.
and by the water thing. I'm going to do that right after this, so that's exciting. And then do you have any kind of last words that you want to leave, not last words, but final thoughts of the episode that you want to leave people with as we go?
Yeah, you have to really work on getting yourself out of this spell, because if you don't, first you have to see you're under a spell. And if you can see that, then the world will help you figure out where to go next. But if you don't see it, and if you deny that you're under a spell, you're in trouble.
Well said. I love it. So, fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing, and this has been your analog electric concentric dose of wisdom, according to Dr. Thomas Cowan, the Vortex of Heart Truth Master. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So we all know that the heart is the center of everything. It is the center chakra. We point to it when expressing who we are most deeply and what we feel and stand for most strongly. We feel our emotions there, sometimes physically. It is a part of us that suffers the most when we live out of alignment with our true self, our environment, and our universe. So why is it that most of us identify with our brains the most? Why do we feel that we are our thoughts? Why do we identify with our thoughts and think that they are who we are? Perhaps we've been misled by our hyper-focus on cognition and all that is mental. Perhaps our society is out of balance precisely because we cogitate endlessly and drive ourselves into anxiety and depression because of it, forgetting that we are here, our feet can feel the earth, our eyes can reach the heavens, and we are the center of all that is in connection with others. Until you feel your feet on the bare earth, your eyes filled with sky, and your hands clutched with other hands, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
Nasty motherfuckers with a hook and a sickle. Brought to you advertisement, bone plated nickel. Fire rate automatic smash from the get-go. Snack on the whack, fermented flesh disco. Abracadabra, archaic altars don't slabber. Hey, making jabbers with reality backwards. Hunting rap nerds, bodyguard collected actors. Munitions are famished, let them feast upon the dapper. Bloody bibs and muddy kicks, feasting on amygdalas. Iron fist, tyrant shit, APO will rip you up. The rhyme rainmaker, vein style backbreaker. Genghis Khan depleted uranium satellite lasers. Cloaked in anonymity, I know you never heard of me. No rusted tools used for Crowley style surgery.
Dissect a whole set, God body. God taught me to dissect the whole body. When it gets sloppy, I'ma get there. Rhymes rare like steak, get crushed like crates to create 52 states. And it's Baghdad, dust to towels, no rags. Straight milk dash, dust to ash. Turbans while the niggas perkin'. It's on purpose, my service touches the sun's surface. And rainbows touch serpents. My light all night shines so bright. I'm a star for eons, Hollywood's for peons. Cause they try to copy the same shit we on. Hey, I ain't done yet. Lungs depleted and can't breathe, can't believe it. Trying to seek it while trying to peep it. It's a secret. Now you're nobody. Label somebody. Trying to claim John Gotti. It's yours truly, God body.